Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Hoot Hoot KSU podcast. Hopefully the video is clearer this time. So it's a funny thing before we kind of get started that I said it last week, just continuing to try to make the production value of these videos and audio a little bit better. Let me make an adjustment to the camera. So last week I tried to kind of put it all together in one using my MacBook, and that camera quality is just not great. And so when I saw the video, the content was fine, but the video quality was not great. So I wanted to come back to the original way I did it. So we're getting there. Should have heard some intro music as well coming into the podcast. So that's, slowly but surely, it's getting a little bit better every week. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm definitely enjoying it. Thank you so much for any feedback or support or positive words that people put out there on the different platforms. Again, you can follow us on TikTok, on YouTube, on X. Also, podcasts, the audio version is available on all podcasting platforms, whether it's, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, anything you can think of. It's out there. So please like and follow. Please visit the Etsy store if you're interested in a shirt or a hat or anything like that. It's all proceeds go to supporting the show and hopefully providing support to travel around and kind of show you what's happening around the country, but specifically KSU and the journey that they'll go on. Today, I kind of wanted to finish up where we left off last week. Talk about kind of some big picture things that have happened this week, but then go into the defensive side of the ball with Kennesaw State. So first things first this week, the biggest news is that the ACC has settled with Clemson, Florida State, and North Carolina to an extent. Basically, what the decision was is that those larger programs that gain more interest from the general public, they are going to start receiving more money than teams that do not generate as much interest from a ratings point of view on television. So you're looking at Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, those are the biggest ones, gaining anywhere from $15 to $20 million a year. From that perspective, with additional revenue being generated based on their ratings. If you look at the ratings, those teams in the ACC consistently bring in the most eyeballs. They're the biggest brands in the country in that conference. And so when you compare Clemson's ratings versus an NC State, for example, it's not even comparable. Much more people are watching that. And if you want to get some perspective, hop onto any YouTube channel with condensed game footage and look how many people are watching the condensed state games of a Florida State or North Carolina or Clemson versus, like a Wake Forest, Cal, Stanford, those kind of teams. It's just not comparable. So to have them being paid the same amount, yeah, that's where they decided to kind of make amends, and in order to close out the lawsuit, to settle it, that was the settlement. Additionally, though, what becomes very interesting in time is that a number has finally been created for an exit fee from the ACC for those larger programs if they do want to go to other conferences. So originally, when the lawsuit was going on, it would take up to $500 million plus a little bit more than that for Florida State or Clemson to leave the ACC and also retain their media rights. So basically, if they paid the buyout to get out of the conference but didn't pay for the media rights, that means that the ACC would then earn the revenue of any media rights that the Florida State would get being in the SEC or the Big Ten. So that wasn't good. What it is right now is every year that Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, I'm using those three consistently because those are the three largest rating brands. Miami's there, but Miami's dependent on how well the team is doing. Complete night and day depending on how well their season's going, where even last year Florida State's ratings were still very high, even though it was a disaster of a season. So what's going to happen is every year that's played, you have a lesser number. It goes down by 18 million to get out of the ACC, which by 2030, the number would be around 77 million. Now, why is this important? Because in 2030 is when the Big Ten renegotiates their television contract. It's up. So they'll either go with Fox or ESPN probably. I think 32 is when the SEC's contract is up. So that's when they'll renegotiate as well. So now Florida State and Clemson have a number that they can use that they know they have to pay to be out of the conference. They're receiving more money per year, and it helps them close the gap on what teams in the SEC and the Big Ten are making. Prior to this, just as a reminder, teams in the SEC, and we can say Mississippi State just for argument's sake, or we can say Rutgers in the Big Ten. Those teams are making around 30 to 40 million more than Florida State is in the ACC as it was currently constructed. Every year, year after year, even though they're not bringing many eyeballs or much to those conferences other than the local fans who are watching them. No one's tuning in to watch a Mississippi State team versus an out-of-conference opponent or like a group of five opponent as they would to watch Alabama play South Florida, for example, or a Georgia team playing whomever they play. I mean, just a smaller program. Still, eyeballs are going to focus on those games for the first half anyways until it gets out of hand. So Florida State and Clemson, North Carolina are very happy. It definitely supports Miami, Louisville for sure. Even though they weren't involved with the lawsuit, they still benefit from it. So if they continue to have success on the field, then more eyeballs will pay attention to them. They'll also earn more money. Additionally, what the ACC has done is those teams that get to the conference final receive more money. Those teams that get to the playoffs receive more money. So every round the college football playoffs, I believe, is $8 million. The ACC is also adding additional funds to that amount if you're able to get to the college football playoffs and all the way to the final. So it's all there. I mean, it's definitely, it doesn't close the gap. I mean, it does close the gap. It doesn't make it equal, if you will, but now it's a $10 million difference for a Florida State or a Clemson versus a $40 million difference year over year. And what has been happening with the sport, as we've discussed previously, is that a lot of the amount of money that the Big Ten and the SEC are making year over year from football are now being applied to the other teams. The other sports. So you look at basketball. I mean, I think basketball is the easiest one to see. Is go back 10 years and the ACC was a basketball conference. All the great teams were in the ACC. That has now changed. And the great teams are in the SEC. The great teams are in the Big Ten. I mean, the SEC is loaded with top 10 teams right now and probably will have one of those teams at least get to the finals probably. I mean, I think Duke is probably the best team in the country. That's the only team in the ACC that's really worth anything right now. But yeah, in softball, for example, another sport that's being funded by the football programs. I mean, you look at the Oklahomas of the world who are just a juggernaut. You look at baseball. Look what SEC baseball has become the last 5 or 6 years. They have the best coaches, the best players, the best facilities. And all this is because of the amount of money that the football programs for those universities are bringing in. So I think it's a positive thing as far as for those teams to be able to catch up, especially if you're a fan of those teams. I'm curious about what impact it has on the future. I think that what's probably going to happen is one of two things, is either the SEC and the Big Ten will continue to expand a little, which by adding teams in their footprint to make their brands better. That is the conservative thing I think will happen. The less conservative or the more wild philosophy is that once we get to the 2030s, early 2030s, is that a super conference is created. And it's just going to be 64 teams, the best 64 teams in the country, that'll be in its own conference. There'll probably be a Southern, I don't want to say it's like the NFL, but it's kind of becoming like the NFL. You'll probably break it up into 4 different groups pretty much, and those teams will be their own segment of the conference. So if you can imagine a Southeastern Conference would be, Bama, Georgia, Florida State, Miami, Florida, maybe a Georgia Tech, maybe a Clemson. Like all those teams are in a segment of this super conference. Then you look at the Northeast and you're looking at the Ohio States, the Michigans, etc. You look at the West, you're looking at the Oregons, Washington, Utah. Texas can go either way. Same with Oklahoma. We'll see kind of where that goes, but I think that that's a very real possibility because, again, if it's all about money, then that's the way to get the most money is to have the best teams playing each other week in, week out, without the Sisters of the Poor or the games that we really don't care about that you watch a half of and you go and you do something else. What's in it for advertisers and broadcasters is for you to be glued to the TV screen from start to finish of that game. How do you do that? You put compelling matchups on the field, things that people don't want to turn away from, even if they're a neutral. If you're going to watch Ohio State and Oregon or Ohio State versus Clemson on a random Saturday, you're watching that whole game probably, unless your team that you follow is playing. But if they're not, then you're definitely probably watching that game, especially if it's competitive. Now, same scenario, but at that same weekend at the 8 o'clock hour, you've got Ohio State versus Clemson. You've got Texas playing, Florida State. I mean, people are watching those games. You got Georgia playing in Oregon on a random weekend. People are watching those games, and they're not going to turn off the TV. So what happens to the other teams? Well, I think that in that scenario that their super conference is made, I think you're going to see a lot of teams kind of get reshuffled out of there. So the Vanderbilts of the world, the Wake Forest of the world, Mississippi State, Rutgers, for example, Purdue, all those teams will probably go to a different kind of conference setting or a different level of college football, where the best teams will be up top and those teams will be at a lower level. I don't know if I think the Atlantic Coast Conference or the Big 12 or any of those go away per se. They'll just be watered down a great deal. There is also talk of if there was a great deal of movement of what power teams are left to go to the Big 10 or the SEC. So take away Clemson, North Carolina, Miami, Florida State from the ACC. In the Big 12, well, there's a few teams that could go. But taking those two conferences and pushing them together, to me, a third super conference, if you will. So, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities out there, but I think if nothing else, you'll see a move made from Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina probably around 27, 28. You'll start kind of hear rumblings about it, just like you did with Texas and Oklahoma a few years back when they were joining the SEC. It was announced they'd be joining the SEC. They played another year in the Big 12, and then they had left. So you can see that scenario taking place in the 2030s. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, I bring it up because that's the biggest story from this past week. The ACC absolutely had to give in to those teams. Obviously, there was some fear that they would lose the lawsuit completely, which would destroy the conference altogether if Florida State or Clemson could leave without a penalty and they could just join whoever. So the ACC definitely got the worst end of this agreement, and the teams definitely got the better end of the agreement, but it does keep the conference intact for a few more years. So we'll see what they do with the conference fully intact, without the disgruntled conference members continuing to cause a distraction to the rest of the conference. So we'll see what happens. But also it brings up the question of, okay, Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia, funny enough, is a brand that a lot of teams are interested in, or a lot of conferences are. They leave. What do you do? Well, what you do is you have to replace them with teams that still share the same geographic footprint. And this is where teams like a Kennesaw State, like a Jacksonville State, like a Liberty, you could see them going up a level to the ACC or the Big 12. Similar to what Central Florida had done some years ago, where they were in the American Conference, they were successful. There was movement in the Big 12 with Texas and Oklahoma. So now Central Florida was able to join the Big 12. So that is the way that this works. One domino falls, other dominoes fall into place. So for Kennesaw State, their best opportunity is to make a brand for themselves in the next 5 years, 4 or 5 years, to be one of those group of 5 teams that has the opportunity to go into a larger conference, a more established conference like the Big 12 or the ACC. As it stands right now with the 14-team playoff, they have not agreed to this yet, but it looks like it's projecting that way, is that there's a guaranteed slot, 2 guaranteed slots for the ACC, 2 guaranteed slots for the Big 12 to be in the college football playoff. Remember last week we talked about that there was only 1 guaranteed spot for a group of 5 team, and there's a ton of those, like 60 some odd group of 5 teams. So you have a better opportunity to be in a conference with less teams, to be the second place team in that conference, and will have an opportunity to go into the college football playoff than you do a group of 5 team where you're pulling from 4 or 5 different conferences to figure out who the best one of those teams are. And that's going to be based on rankings and name, honestly. So, again, you're looking at a Boise State being probably the biggest brand in the group of 5. So it definitely gives smaller team a target to shoot for. And they have, 4 or 5 years to get their act together to be able to make a case for themselves and what eyeballs they can bring to the screen to better improve a conference that they'd be joining a level ahead. So Kennesaw State I bring up, well, obviously, because it's the Hoot Hoot KSU podcast. But I also bring it up because I think with the geographic footprint and just the recruiting base, the Southeast, who is infatuated with college football more than pro, is a very appealing market to take on. But the brand has to be a brand. It has to be something that people know. How do people know about a brand? There's a lot of exposure. And that's kind of what we've been talking about the last few weeks, has been, how do you get your name out there? How do you build something up? How do you become somebody from all these teams out there? There's only so many spots you can go into. So how do you separate yourself from others? Sorry about that. My paper was falling. And the way you do that is to win and be on TV as much as possible, to be quite honest with you, to be successful in the field, to put some players in the pros so they know that if I go to a school like a Kennesaw State, like a Liberty, something like that, that I'll have an opportunity to play at the next level, because that's what it's all about. Right now, we're at the beginning still. We're at the genesis for a team like Kennesaw State, to where you are starting from scratch, literally, with this season. Well, not scratch, but pretty close to being at scratch, with a new coaching staff, a lot of players coming and going. So with a second year in Conference USA, it's definitely a time to start moving in a positive direction. The Owen, not winning any games, winning 2 games a year, that can't continue, or you'll just be a team that no one even knows anything about or cares anything about, and you will lose the support. So it's definitely up to them, to Kennesaw State or any of these smaller teams, to start making a name for themselves and start winning, start becoming a team that's on TV that people want to watch, that has an interesting story. Again, as I said in the first episode of this podcast, that I think Kennesaw State has the most interesting story of any team in the country. It is the youngest team. We have no idea where it's going to go. It's in a talent-rich environment in the Southeast outside of Atlanta. All the pieces are there. But what are you going to do with it? You got to do something with it, or it's not going to make a difference. So let's talk about then, as I transition away from the big picture stuff to Kennesaw State. So real fast, just to put a end cap, if you will, on last week's discussion about the offense, we had said kind of a fast tempo offense was Mac's background every place he had stayed. So some footage from this week can be seen online, and what you can see is just what we discussed, is tempo, quick reads, a lot of read option pass, etc. So if you're watching any of the footage from this week of practice, what you're going to see is just that, is quarterbacks are reading the line, they're deciding whether they're going to hand it off or run it, and they're using that also as play action as far as to throw a pass over the middle as well. So that's what you're going to see. A lot of quick reading, a lot of movement, a lot of tempo. So fast, fast, fast is going to be the goal of this offense, with the idea that as time goes on, you wear a team down. The key to any offense like that is to be successful, especially on first down, which can set the tone for the rest of the game. You cannot go 3 and out. It's not going to work. That offense blows up if you play teams that can shut you down, and you're not able to kind of get your offensive rhythm established. Those are long days. But if you can get it going and you can move the ball, you can definitely be successful. Kennesaw State's philosophy offensively will be to score as many points as possible. Now, someone out there is going to say, well, yeah, everybody's ideas do that to an extent. Some teams, though, especially if further north you go, it seems like, Bama and Georgia are kind of like this too. If you can get a lead, you can run the ball. You've got enough depth and enough size on the offensive line to where you can kind of control the ball, take the air out of the ball a little bit, and just beat teams down with the running game. You're not looking to put up 100 points. You're simply looking to control the ball, eat the clock up, rely on your defense, and just close games out. Traditional old school football, you're bigger, you're stronger, you're faster than the teams you're playing. So you blow them off the ball and you just run it down their throat, and the game expires and you've won 35-7, 35-14, 28-7, something like that. What Kennesaw State will try to do is they'll try to put up as many points as they can as fast as they can and rely on their defense to limit then scoring opportunities. The definition of bend but don't break will be this defense. So basically what you're looking for is you're looking to be aggressive on third downs. You're looking to prevent touchdowns where teams have to get field goals to be able to score. They can get in the red zone, but you bow up in the red zone, they get field goals, giving your offense another opportunity to quickly score another touchdown. And sooner or later it becomes kind of a score fest, if you will, where you're winning games by giving up an average of 28 points a game on defense. If your offense is successful giving up 28 points, you're going to win a lot of games. You're going to win 42-28, 35-28, stuff like that. But that's the goal right now for Kennesaw State, is the bend but don't break defensive approach. Kennesaw State, underneath Bohannon, used a 3-4. Underneath their newest defensive coordinator, is Anthony Mattioli, is going to most likely run a 3-4 as well, because you already have players who know that defense, but he has a history of multiple sets. Meaning that you say that your base defense is a 3-4, and you can do a lot of movement, you can hide a lot of blitzes through a 3-4. But when you're going up against bigger teams that have a larger offensive line, a power rushing attack, a 3-4 can be susceptible to that. So multiple being is that if you need to, you can bring someone out of the secondary. You can do a more of a 4-3 if you needed to have a bigger defensive line. But the majority of which is going to be a 3-4 look. And that just gives them the most flexibility. Plus, the players that are carryovers from last year are going to be more familiar with that system and kind of what it takes. So I kind of have typed out a few things that I'll read from here for just a second, just kind of talking about the defense. And this is really just kind of a summary on how Mattioli is and kind of what the type of coach he is and what his background is a little bit. So I'm going to read this real fast about just kind of what his philosophies are. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a few moments. So basically with the defensive coordinator, his background would suggest that they're looking for a team that is physical. You got to be physical, got to be able to put your head in there. You have to attack, and you got to be fast. You got to be disciplined. With a 3-4, the place that you get yourself in the most trouble is if you don't know what your responsibility is on the field. So what they would do then is that they need players that know exactly what is expected to them. They are going to be out-talented a good bit. And the way you overcome being out-talented by the teams that you are playing is to be disciplined and to know what you're supposed to do, to recognize that the time to attack is going to be on those moments where change can happen. So a third down, for example, a 3rd and 4 or greater, attacking that, preventing the first down, making them punt. You know, 1st and 10 or 1st and goal, for example, and holding a team who's 1st and goal to a field goal. That's where you make the difference. That's how you separate yourself from the team you're playing and allow your offense, who should be difficult to stop based on just speed and tempo, to go down and score another touchdown. And sooner or later, as time goes on, in theory, a team becomes more predictable if they cannot match you touchdown for touchdown. All of a sudden, it starts to shift over to a passing game versus a running game. And with a 3-4 defense, you have the majority of your players in the secondary, so you can contain a passing game. A 3-4 is more susceptible to a running game than it is a passing game. So that's kind of the keys to success with Florida State's defense. Last year, for example, Kennesaw State, who did run a 3-4, were giving up over 400, on average 400 yards a game, which is just not going to get it done. I mean, it's just not. It's not going to get it done. You're just going to get abused by that stuff. And that was against teams that, you know, Syracuse was a surprise. I mean, Syracuse was a lot better last year than a lot of people had thought, but still, it's a lot of points against teams that are just okay. And in common opponents, like a Jacksonville State, for example. Now, they did have the game against Liberty. And in that game against Liberty, they played great. And there is no doubt in watching this team and watching all the games last year, heart is definitely something that this team had. Out-talented for sure, but you did not see much quit on that team at all. You had guys playing every single snap as hard as they could, and that is something that you can work with. That is completely different than a team that's just giving up and shutting down. So basically, whenever you have a high-tempo offense, you need a defense then that matches that high-tempo offense. The worst-case scenario is that Kennesaw State cannot move the ball on offense. And because of the tempo of the offense, you're not giving your defense time to rest. So, for example, if you're going to go fast and you're not going to eat up any clock, that means, and you go 3 and out, that means 30 seconds of game time has expired before you're putting the ball back, pretty much. Your defense has had no time to rest. They're going to get worn down, and they're not going to be able to stop anybody, and you're going to lose those games. However, if it works and you can limit team scoring in possessions, and your defense just does enough and doesn't break on you, then at that moment in time, that's a formula for winning with this offense. And where does that go from there? Well, that means your record is better, right? Therefore, you are a larger commodity or a more interesting commodity to put on television. So you have more opportunities to be the only show in town on a Tuesday or Thursday night. Second thing is now you can show your product on the field and how successful you were to now start tempting those recruits that may have been passed over by a Georgia or an Auburn or a Tennessee or Georgia Tech or a Florida State. I mean, those are the teams in Alabama. Those are the teams right in that same area. That's who you're competing against. In a year, I think there's a home and home with Georgia State as well. Win that. Take more teams away from more players away from a team that other people consider that are still in your recruiting thumbprint or footprint. I should have said, sorry. Win those things. Those are the things you can do. The goal is to get better players. Always the goal is to get better players. And how do you get better players? You show them what you can do for them. You show the tape, you put the tape out there, and you show this player came to me, they've got this much better, and they went on to have a successful career at the professional level. That's what you do. That's how you build a program. You've got 5 years. 5 years to really turn this around and to show that you can be successful at this level and that when players come to you, they leave that much better than they walked in the door, which shows growth, which shows interest from other players to want to reproduce the exact same thing. I said in the very beginning that one of the things I like about this coaching staff, the head coach, defensive coordinator, etc., is that they have experience in bigger time football teams. I'm not going to talk about Rice. I mean, Rice is not, I wouldn't say Rice is a big team, but Tennessee. But the University of Tennessee, a lot of these coaches have experience at the University of Tennessee. They know what great players look like. They know what gifted running backs, defensive linemen, linebackers, wide receivers, quarterbacks, they know what they look like. So they know what they're looking for. They're not blown away when they get their first 5-star player because they've never played or never coached a player like that before. They've seen it. They know what the body type they want. They know what the attitude looks like. They know what they expect with the discipline. And that is what you are trying to build towards, to where you can consistently get players like that to attend your school, whether through the portal or through high school recruiting. Another thing that's kind of, no one's really talking too much about this, and they should. There's two things. One is the extended eligibility with junior college. Junior college now does not count against your eligibility. So you can have someone who played in junior college for 2 years come to a Kennesaw State, for example, and they would have 4 years of eligibility. That's huge. I mean, that's massive. And all of a sudden, that makes it even more tempting to go to these schools. Secondly, and this is also what's definitely happening right now, is that you are running out of places for high school recruits to go to. Not the elite ones, but your usual 2- and 3-star athletes. Why? Because teams are now going to the portal first to get experienced players at the college level to come in to their team and kind of plug and play. They're pulling from junior colleges as well to plug and play. So the opportunity that was there to go to a big-time program like a Georgia, like an Alabama, etc., that window is shrinking. Now, the 5-stars are going to go. Sure, absolutely. But those guys who are on the edge, the 3- and 4-star players, now there's not as much opportunity, because I know as a head coach that I'd have to wait 2 years for you, that you're going to be a project and you may not pan out, versus bringing in a recruit or a transfer portal from another big-time program who has proven that they can be successful at a high level. So now high school recruits who are good, may not be the most elite in the country, but are good, they are running out of opportunity of places to go. So where do they go? They go to smaller schools that are trying to establish themselves, like Kennesaw State, and they start to make a name for themselves there. So now you have the opportunity to get an influx of high school talent to build towards. That would be the ultimate goal for a team like Kennesaw State. So as much as I don't love where the sport has gone with the money, with the NIL, because I do think that it's kind of, I think it's just changing the sport, but change is inevitable, I guess. There are advantages for teams, smaller teams, like any of the Group of 5 teams, like Kennesaw State, like Liberty, like Jacksonville State. All those opportunities are out there for them now. They have a better chance now than any time in their history to bring in higher quality players and do something with them. Consistency will be a problem, most likely. It's going to be difficult to be consistent over a period of time when you're playing in Conference USA, the American Athletic Conference. But the opportunity is there to make a run, to be a Cinderella. That is absolutely there. And if these playoffs keep expanding, which they're going to go to 16 teams, it gives you that much more opportunity to sneak in. If you can get a smaller team into the playoffs like this, it would change everything. It would change everything. A Tulane, for example, or Liberty, who has been consistently a very decent program over the last few years. Those teams, a Marshall, those teams that you know by name, if you can get those teams into the playoffs, then all of a sudden, it changes everything for them. It's program changing is what it is. And from that point forward, they have that much more money that they never had before to be able to put into their programs. And that part I like a lot. I like that a whole lot. I don't love the every year free agency with the portal. That's a problem that needs to be addressed, because you can have a player who says that they're going to go someplace, they get paid, and then they change their mind and go someplace else. There's a Wisconsin-Miami situation right now that's happening that will, I think there's a lawsuit out there that will have a significant impact. Basically, a player from Wisconsin gets an NIL for playing at Wisconsin. They get paid. Then all of a sudden, they're contacted by Miami, and they decide to go to Miami because Miami gives them even more than what Wisconsin was giving them. But the player doesn't have to pay back Wisconsin. So they can take their $250,000, for example, go to Miami, make another $500,000. Now that's all well and good, right? Good for the players to finally be getting paid because the university and the coaches have been making an absurd amount of money off these players for decades, right? But the problem is that because there is no loyalty, because funds are still limited in some schools, they can't afford for those things to happen. So most likely what happens is there'll be some kind of a cap for a university to spend. The money's going to have to go through the university. And in addition to there being a cap, there'll probably be some kind of a contract that you have to play here or stay here for at least 2 years before you can transfer someplace else. So we'll see. I mean, like I said, every week it seems like something's going on, which is good because the content right now in February and March is not readily available. Once we get to April and we start getting past spring practices with the next round of transfer portals in the summer as we get closer to the season, there's a lot more to talk about. But right now is usually that kind of dead time where not a lot's happening. So with the news breaking, it's funny how college is almost following the NFL's blueprint, which is to constantly have something out there to space out the season, even the off season, so that you continue to have interest in the sport, even though it's the off season. This week in the NFL, for example, a lot of combine footage, a lot of projections of where players will go in the draft. Next month will be the draft, and then that will start that whole conversation as they go into the following season. It's very similar with college, is that next month, instead of there being a draft, there'll be a lot of spring games. You'll have transfer portal news that breaks with players going different places, and now you can start projecting once rosters are finalized. So definitely an exciting time for Kennesaw State. I like what I've seen so far. Next week, what we'll do, we'll look at recruiting as far as where we are right now, and then we'll kind of come back after the spring game and see kind of what's going well, what's not going well, look at different philosophies that we see, different formations, and kind of what to expect going into next season. The spring game also tells you kind of what you're missing from your roster and what you need to focus on as you go out into the transfer portal and to get ready for the 25-26 season. So thank you so much. Again, thanks for being patient with me. Once again, check out our Etsy shop. Please access, like, subscribe, YouTube, X, TikTok, any of the podcast platforms that are out there. Weekly content right now. And then as we get into the season, probably bi-weekly, I would say, about a review of a game and then also what to expect from the following week. So we look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you so much for your support. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.